I'm 4 years old. I started watching birds. I watched the birds as I was growing up in the garden. I think they're a good way to connect with nature.
British man Terry Townshend likes to track birds in the remote areas of Beijing. He gets up at 4:30 a.m. every Saturday and Sunday, and then drives for dozens of kilometers to the reservoirs in the Beijing suburbs, where he patiently observes for a couple of hours. He has been birdwatching in Beijing for over 10 years. He has devoted his spare time to observing, studying, and recording the habitat and breeding of different birds in China.
Well, my name's Terry, and I've been living in China now for 10 years. My background is on environment law and environment economics. But since I've been in China, I've got more involved in practical wildlife conservation, which is my passion really. There are about 10,000 species of bird in the world. China has more than 1,400, nearly 1,500. Another aspect that really impressed me is the number of birds. So not just the number of different species, but the volume. And in spring and autumn, there is a huge flow of birds that come through Beijing on their way north. And again in autumn, when it gets really cold in Russia, they come south through Beijing again. They have these huge mass movements of birds. So we describe it as like a super highway for birds.
From observing and protecting birds to paying attention to biodiversity, the superhighway for birds has led him to further his research on biodiversity protection.
Recently, last 3 years, I've been working with an organisation for 3 days a week, working more on policy, and they focus very much on the nexus between environment and economics. They also have a program right now on biodiversity financing. So last year we've been very focused on that issue because China's hosting the United Nations Conference on Biodiversity later this year in Kunming. And 190 countries are due to agree on a new international framework to slow and hopefully halt biodiversity loss. And the Chinese government were very interested in how we generate funding for nature, how we generate more resources going into nature conservation. And the challenge is to ensure that our development as we go forward is consistent with tackling the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. And that's not easy. I mean, we can do it, there's no question we can do it. But it's about changing, fundamental change in how we do things and aligning the biodiversity targets, the climate targets in everything we do. So now in China we have a carbon neutrality target, for example, 2060. So now all the companies are thinking, right, how do we make sure that we're carbon neutral by 2060? And that's what has to happen. The governments can set the targets, but actually they can't do it on their own. It's all sectors of society that have to align their operations with that goal. And it's the same on biodiversity. So whatever comes out of Kunming conference later this year, that hopefully there'll be a new agreement with targets and timelines, and that's going to have to drive every sector of society is going to have to look at that and say, right, how do we make sure that we're in line with that target?